Good morning. Good morning. Welcome, welcome, welcome for those of you here. For those of you who are online at home in your living rooms, we say welcome to you as well. Hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving and you remember to set your scales back 10 pounds. I know I go about 15 if I need to. If you want to, on the end of the rows, there are Bibles. You want to pass those down. We're going to be in Mark 5 today. If you want to go ahead and turn, that's on page 815. Or if you have a Bible app on your smartphone, go ahead and pull that out, and as long as it's not a Samsung. I'm not a big book reader. In fact, it kind of embarrasses my wife because she reads all the time. But I just don't read books. I don't know why. I've maybe read 2 to 3 books in my entire life, voluntarily, minus the ones, they make you read in school. But I love reading articles online. Maybe because I have a short attention span, they're not as long. Or I feel like accomplished that I actually started something I finished reading, or finished reading something I started. And so I love articles online. And as I was reading through articles online, I came across one with a title that said, "Reformed Skinhead Endures Agony to Remove Tattoos." And this was the picture of the article online. You can see right away it caught my attention. I was like, oh, dude, I got to read what this is about. And come to find out, it's actually about a guy by the name of Brian Widener, who is a former neo-Nazi, white supremacy skinhead leader who went through this process of removing his tattoos on his face, his neck, and his hands. And I just got so intrigued by this article. And not just the idea of this tattoo removal, but just the change of heart that this guy had. And it's just such a fascinating story. They actually created a documentary about it called Erasing Hate. And I watched the documentary. I watched interviews of him online. And I just want to share some of his story with you. Basically, he became a skinhead at the age of 14 through a relative. And being a skinhead was the perfect breeding ground for all the anger and hate he had built up inside of him from just a crappy home life. And when he joined the skinhead movement, he sought out the most notorious group called the Hammerskins. And these guys were known for being the most violent, most aggressive, basically the most hateful group that there was. And within this group, he became known as the Pitbull. That was his nickname. Because he was willing to attack anyone, anywhere, at any time. In the documentary, it talks about how he looked forward to these violent encounters with other people. And he says, I surrendered to the fact that one or two things was going to happen. Either I was going to end up in prison for the rest of my life, or I was going to end up dead. And along with becoming a skinhead, became tattoos. And not just normal tattoos that people get, hateful, neo-Nazi, white supremacist tattoos. He got his first tattoo at the age of 14, right when he joined. He had hate written right across his knuckles. And that was just the beginning. He had neo-Nazi tattoos all over his body. Some he got for beating up minorities. It was kind of like, he had to earn these tattoos. The dude has a tattoo of a straight razor along his jawline because he says that was my weapon of choice whenever I got in a bar fight. I carried a straight razor with me. And above his eye was a thick black arrow. I mean, I think okay, that's kind of weird. But basically what that meant was, for anyone who knew it meant that he was willing to kill for his race. And here's a picture of what he kind of looks like with all the tattoos. And believe it or not, the crazy thing was, this dude found someone to marry him, right? He met his wife, Julie, at a white power rally, and they were married shortly after. And shortly after they married, they started a family. Julie already had some kids of her own, and then she and Brian had a child of their own together. And as they started this family, they started to question kind of their beliefs and their lifestyle. They started thinking, is this really, the way we've lived and the way we've treated people, is this really how we want our kids to grow up? Is this the lifestyle we want them to lead? And they started having a change of heart. And they started realizing that this idea of white supremacy and all other races are bad was really kind of pointless and not amounting to anything. And so they started looking for ways to remove themselves from this. However, it's not that easy. See, when he went to his group leader and was like, look, man, I think I need to step away from this for a while, focus on my family. He was basically told, well, you have a choice to make then. You can either choose the club, the skinhead gang, or your family. It's your choice. And after he chose his family, the death threats followed. For 2 years, they received death threats all hours of the night. There'd be times that friends who were still skinheads would be like, hey, dude, they're coming to get you. You guys need to leave. And they would flee to a hotel for the night. He talks about he and his wife would alternate for these 2 years of staying up all night because they were fearful that someone would come and get them. So they'd be on watch all night long. And it's awesome that he talks about during these late night stakeouts, basically, is when he started reading the Bible. He started learning, like, what is this whole Jesus thing really about? And during this time also, he started praying, God, you've got to get us out of this. You've got to remove us from this situation. Eventually, God answered that prayer, and they were able to remove themselves from being neo-Nazi, skinhead, white power followers after being involved for 16 years. And they moved from Michigan, where they were living, to Tennessee to start over again, basically. However, removing himself from the situation that he was in only solved part of the problem, because Brian was still covered with these hateful tattoos all over his body. And it wasn't the tattoos that was the problem. It was what they stood for. It was the hate and the anger that they stood for. So he started looking into tattoo removal. One, just to be able to get a job. He talks about how, when you have hateful tattoos and a straight razor on your face, people aren't willing to give you jobs a whole lot. But also, more importantly, because he wanted to erase the hate that he had put on his body. See, God had changed his heart, and he wanted the outside to reflect the inside. However, the problem was they had no money, no health insurance, and tattoo removal is very, very expensive. Way more expensive to get a tattoo removed than it is to put it on. So kids, remember this when you think it's cool to get a Pikachu tattoo on your ankle, all right? Way more expensive to get it off than it is to put it on. And so he actually started to research home remedies. How can I remove these tattoos myself? And he looked at using dermal acid, basically taking acid and pouring it on his skin in order to get these tattoos. That's how badly he wanted them gone. Ironically, his wife contacted an organization which fights the white power movement. And she contacted them to see if there was any way they could help. Now, when she contacted them, the thing is, they knew who Brian was. He wasn't just like any old skinhead. He was a leader in the skinhead movement. And he was someone who was on their radar for a long time. And so when she contacted him, they were first a little skeptical, like, whoa, wait a minute here. Is this for real? Like, is this guy serious? This isn't a setup, right? But after they listened to his story and they saw his change of heart, they decided to see if they could do to help out. And not only did they help out, they actually found someone to donate $35,000 to have the tattoos surgically removed. At first, he was a little apprehensive. One, because super painful. But the second was, he was thinking, like, why do I get a second chance at this? Like, why does someone else have to pay for me to get a second chance at life? The doctors explained to him how they would use lasers repeatedly over the area again and again to break up the ink, and that would eventually come out of his skin. And they told him, the quote said, you're going to feel like you have the worst sunburn in the entire world. And your face will swell up like a boxer. Even though it was going to be a painful process, he decided to go through with it, almost like a punishment for the lifestyle that he had lived. In his first appointment, they worked on just the right side of his face. And before they could use a laser, they had to numb the area. In order to numb the area, he had to get 30 injections just in the right side of his face. And then they would use a laser on the areas. Second appointment, same thing. Left side of his face, 30 injections just to be able to use the lasers. After those first two appointments, they had to knock him out after that. It was too painful to go through with it. However, he still woke up with feeling like he had a massive sunburn, blisters that were like, the size of baseballs on his face. I mean, if you ever watch a documentary called Erasing Hate, they show him before and after going into surgery, and it's like painful to watch. You feel bad for the dude. He's just agonizing in pain. And after they worked on his face, they moved to his neck and to his hands. And after 16 16 months and 25 different procedures, doctors were able to remove all these neo-Nazi hateful tattoos from his face. And here's what Brian looks like today. You never even know. It's such a crazy story. And like I said, I love this story. Not just because this process of removing tattoos, which I found kind of fascinating, and knowing that I will never have a tattoo removed, because that just looks painful. But also this idea of this changed life that Brian had. How God had changed his inside, and he wanted the outside to reflect that. And it's interesting that they made a documentary about this because, publicly recanting a violent hate group, such as the white power movement, is dangerous. I mean, they've obviously already threatened to kill you, and now you're going to make a documentary about how you're choosing no longer to live that lifestyle. And so, actually, his family, they moved the day after the documentary aired for fear that someone would come after them. And so they asked him, like, dude, why would you put yourself out there like this? Like, what's the benefit of you going public with this story? And he said, quote, he said this, he says, if I could prevent one other kid from doing this, then maybe I can redeem myself, and going through all this will be worth it. We're in a series right now called Jesus Stories. We're looking at stories of Jesus in the Bible. And the story we have today is actually a lot like our story about a guy, Brian, who was just a social outcast from society. This story is actually found 3 places in the Bible. See, guys by the name of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all wrote about Jesus and his life on earth. And 3 of them, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, wrote about this story that we're talking about today. But we're going to look at the one in Mark 5. And just to give you a background to get us caught up to our story, basically up to this point in Jesus' life, he's going around and doing a lot of teaching and teaching in different areas, in different cities. And a lot of the teaching he does are things that people never heard before. Like, this dude's crazy. And as he's traveled around, he's acquired these followers. These first followers we call the disciples. And as he travels around also, he's been hanging out with the low lives of society, people who are like outcasts and whatnot. But he's also been healing people. Like, we're not just talking like cough sniffles, like deathly illnesses, skin disease, people who are paralyzed that couldn't walk, he makes them walk. Sometimes, he would like reach out and touch them and they'd be healed. And other times he would just say the word and they'd be able to walk. It's crazy stuff. But anyway, if you add all these things up, the crazy teaching, the hanging out with low-life society, healing people, you can see why everywhere Jesus went, there was a crowd. Everywhere he went, people followed around to see, what would happen next. When you start making people can't walk, like, you want to see the rest of the show, right? You follow them around. And not only that, people who were sick themselves would come from all over to find Jesus in order for him to heal them. And so because Jesus attracted such a crowd, sometimes when he taught people, he would do so from a boat. So he'd be like in a boat, just sitting off the shore, and on the land were all the people listening so they wouldn't crowd around him. And this is kind of where our story picks up here. So picture Jesus in a boat, people on the land, and he decides it's evening. He's like, hey, let's sail across the other side of the lake and see what's going on over there. This is where we pick up our story in Mark 5. Now, it's a pretty long story, so we're going to kind of break it into chunks and talk about it as we go. This is verse 1 right here. It says, they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one can bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. So Jesus and his buddies, they sail across this lake, and the next morning they arrive in the land of the Gerasenes. It's not necessarily certain who the Gerasenes were, but either way, this is where they lived. And right away, when Jesus steps off the boat, a guy with an impure or evil spirit comes to meet him. Basically, this dude was possessed by a demon, right? And he comes up to Jesus, and here's what it says about him. It says, one, he lived among the tombs. And we're not talking like a cemetery where we go and visit, we put flowers, there's fountains and stuff like that. Basically, the tombs in this day and age were caves, just open caves where they would put dead bodies. No one went to visit them. It wasn't like a place you would go and visit. It also says, people tried to chain him up, but he broke the chains. Look back at verse 4. It says, for he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. So think about that for a second. That means that people living in the nearby town where this guy lived in the cemetery would often go out there and tie him up with chains because he repeatedly broke the chains on him. Imagine if that was your job, to go out and tie up the possessed guy living in the cemetery. Like, I don't know, maybe like rock, paper, scissor. You know, they drew straws. Like, last person would be like, not it, right? I don't know, but definitely not a job you would want. And then it says all the time he would cry out and howl and cut himself with stones. Now, if I was Jesus and I rolled up to the land of the Gerasenes and this crazy dude comes out to me, I'm thinking like, dude, peace out, right? Like, dude, you got some nice scenery here, but your welcome committee sucks, right? I'm out of here. But that's not what happened. Check out what happened. Verse 6, we continue on. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, what do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me. For Jesus had said to him, come out of this man, you impure spirit. So right away, Jesus gets off the boat, and this guy runs up to him, right? And as soon as Jesus sees him, he tells him, come out of this man, you impure spirit. And in response, the demon yells back, what do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture us. Now, this interaction between Jesus and the demons inside this man is kind of crazy. See, when they come up to Jesus, they know who he is. And you're thinking to yourself, well, of course they know who he is. You just told us that everywhere this dude went, he had people following him around, so why would they know who he was? But see, they legitimately knew who he was, and that he was the Son of God. See, everyone else just kind of thought, like, well, this guy's pretty cool. He does some miracles, you know. But see, they knew who he legitimately was. And up to this point, Jesus really hadn't made that known yet. See, when he would heal people, he'd tell them, hey, don't tell anyone about this. Just go home to your people. But of course, they'd go out and tell everyone. And this isn't even the first encounter Jesus has with demons. There's several other places where Jesus comes across someone who's possessed by a demon. And the demon's in that situation as well. Like, we know who you are, Jesus. What do you want with us? And see, this little interaction, it just blows your mind. Because as we see this interaction between the demons and Jesus, we see like this crack in the window to this supernatural, other spiritual realm that exists around us that we don't necessarily see normally, where God is completely in control. And just that idea of this thing that goes on around us we don't see blows my mind. There's so much packed into that little bit, but moving on. Verse 9 says this. Then Jesus asked him, what is your name? My name is Legion, he replied, for we are many. And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them. He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out of the man and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. So Jesus and these demons, they kind of have to continue this little yelling match conversation going on. And the demons beg Jesus, dude, don't send us away. Please don't send us away. And Jesus asked him what his name was, and he said, we are Legion, for we are many. Now, in a Roman army, a legion was 6,000 soldiers. It's uncertain if this dude had 6,000 demons in him, but the idea is there's a lot of demons packed up into this dude. And again, they beg Jesus, please don't send us away. Allow us to go into the pigs. And so Jesus allowed them to do that. And when they did, the pigs ran off the hillside into the lake and drowned. Now, it's uncertain as to why they didn't want to leave the area, but apparently becoming bacon and drowning was a much better alternative. All right, on to verse 14. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed, and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. So those who were in charge of the pigs, they see this happen. They run off to the nearby town. They tell all these people what's going on. All these people come rushing out to see what's happening. And when they come out there, they see the man who was once possessed now sitting there, or calm, dressed. And you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, was he not dressed before? See, we talk about this stories in several places in the Bible. And in the book of Luke, it mentions this guy running around naked. That's like next level crazy. And that also makes the job of tying him up a whole lot worse. I'll be like, not it, for real, like double not it, right? And then it says, in his right mind, or no longer howling and cutting himself. Those who saw what happened began to tell the people showing up. And it says, they were all afraid. Now, notice this. When the guy was possessed by a demon, super strength, howling and cutting himself, and possibly naked, no problem with that. But now they were afraid. Makes no sense. And then they pleaded with Jesus to leave their area. Verse 18 says this. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by the demon, begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him go, but said, go to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed. So basically Jesus is like, all right, you want me to leave? I'm out. As he's getting on the boat, this man who is possessed by the demon asks Jesus, dude, let me go with you. Wherever you go, I will go. But Jesus tells him no. Instead, he says, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you. And that's exactly what this guy did. Not only his own people, but this entire region of 10 cities known as the Decapolis, he went everywhere telling people what had happened to him. It says that people were amazed. Now, personally, this is one of the craziest stories in the Bible to me. I mean, you've got demon-possessed man, the demons inside him talking to Jesus, demons, running into pigs and then dying, crazy man running around naked, like crazy stuff, right? But I think one of the most interesting things in this story is the fact that when the man asked to go with Jesus, he told him no. And dude, I totally get it. Like if I was possessed by like 6,000 or so demons and this dude jumped off a boat and healed me, I'm thinking, dude, wherever you go, dude, I'm following you. I don't care. Wherever you want to go. But Jesus says no to him. Instead, he tells him, go to your own people. Why? Because I think Jesus, he saw the bigger picture. See, Jesus knew that this man's story of how his life had been changed is going to be much more impactful on people who knew who he was. Let me give you a little example of what I mean to get you thinking in this direction. If you've ever lost a significant amount of weight, you understand this principle. I've always been a big guy, okay? When I was growing up, I used to think Husky was a name brand and not the section for fat kids, all right? However, like 5 years ago, I really worked hard on trying to lose some weight. I was like, hey, I want to see how much weight I can actually lose. And I did a pretty good job. I was eating right. I was working out. And I got to be the thinnest I ever was as an adult. I'm not going to say I was skinny, because this body was never skinny. However, I definitely was as skinny as an adult. And I loved when I'd go back home to visit my family in Indiana, and I'd run into people who hadn't seen me in a while. It was automatically like, dude, man, you look really great, man. I'm so proud of you. Like, I love those conversations. Like, that's right, I do. However, in contrast, if I just went to the grocery store or Walmart or something like that, no one came up to me and be like, dude, Jason, you look really great, man. Because they didn't know the difference. They didn't understand the change that I had occurred inside of me. See, when people have a before and after to compare it to, they're much more impacted. In our story here, it wasn't a before and after of weight loss, but before and after of someone being possessed by a demon. And I guarantee you, people have been impressed by that, especially if they're praised by weight loss. Like, dude, you were possessed by a demon? Dude, you look great. He's like, I know. See, if this guy who was once possessed by a demon had gone with Jesus as he traveled around and told his story of how his life had been changed, I guarantee you it would have been impactful. People would have been impressed. Lives would have been changed. However, think about what happened when he went back to his own people, his family and his friends. And he began to tell them what happened. The people who could compare what he was to what he is now. I guarantee you that's going to have a greater impact on them than people who didn't know it. And this dude did just that. He went everywhere around this entire region that he lived in. And I can guarantee you, even people who hadn't necessarily seen with their own eyes this guy living in the tombs, even before Twitter, news of a guy possessed by a demon, naked, howling, cutting himself, news like that travels fast, all right? And now, as they heard about this man's life and saw how he lived, he can tell them, look, here's what happened. And I bet this dude loved running into people and telling them, hey, remember that demon-possessed guy who lived in the tombs? Yeah. That's me. No way. Yeah. I picture him at the grocery store. You know, he's buying lamb or whatever, you know, they buy back then. Some dude taps him on the shoulder like, hey, this is weird. I'm sorry, but you look familiar. Do I know you from anywhere? Well, you remember that guy who was possessed, cutting himself, naked most of the time? Yeah. That's me? No. Yeah. Dude, you look great. And I want to apologize. I think I tied you up once or twice. Dude, no problem. No problem. I bet he loved these conversations, just like I love when I run into people who ask me about weight loss. And I guarantee at some point in this conversation, the question of, all right, okay, I got to know. What happened? And at that point in time, he was able to tell people about his encounter with Jesus and how his life had been changed. Dude, I wish I was more like that. I wish I longed for opportunities to tell people about what God's doing in my life. I wish I was more like this dude. And see, these conversations would have been a lot different on people who didn't know him personally and what he had gone through. And I think that's why Jesus tells them, go back to your own people and tell them what God has done for you. I think the same is true for us. The people who knew the old you are going to be more influenced by the new you. This is what we see in our buddy Brian. His same principle is true. He knew that if he exposed the hatred that he had for people and how lost he was, people who saw the new him would have a much greater appreciation because they could see the before and the after. And that appreciation might just cause someone not to go down the same path. That's because the people who knew the old you are going to be more influenced by the new you. About a year ago, a buddy of mine that I grew up with, went to high school with, started a church in our hometown of Indianapolis. And this church actually meets in the middle school where we went. However, if you had said to someone back then that Chris was going to be a preacher someday and start a church, they would have laughed at your face. He was way more interested in partying and the ladies than he was anything about church or God or anything like that. He had anger issues that would scare you. Every other word out of his mouth was a cuss word. However, later in high school, he got connected with a church, became a follower of Jesus, and then realized that, I think God's calling me to go into ministry full time. So he went into ministry full time. After college, he worked at a church down in Columbus for a while, worked at a church out in Oklahoma City, and now he started this church in Indianapolis. And this church is a little bit different from any other ones that he's been part of, because the people that listen to him speak on Sunday morning, a lot of them are the people who knew what he was before he became a follower of Jesus. And so when he sits there and he talks to them about, hey, God can change your life. God can make a difference in your life. They can actually see, I believe it, because I remember this dude before, and it's nothing like it is now. They hear the message differently because they have before and after to compare it to. It's because the people who knew the old you are going to be more influenced by the new you. He told me told me a while back after he got done preaching, some guy that he had went to school with came up to him and was like, hey, man, great sermon, but I got to tell you, I was guaranteed you were going to drop the F-bomb at least once during this sermon because that's what they remember. That's what they remember. So what does that mean? What does that mean for the rest of us? You know, those of us who didn't start churches in our hometown or become reformed skinheads or, you know, possessed by a demon. I think it means the same thing that Jesus told this guy who was in our story. Go to your own people and tell them how much God has done for you. Who are your own people? Family, friends, coworkers, guys on your softball team, buddies at the bar, other moms in your play date. These are your people, people who know you. And I understand that sometimes talking with your family can be the hardest thing in the world because you don't know how they're going to respond. How is this going to affect our relationship together? For our people that in our families who aren't connected to a church or really connected with God, we just try to tell them, hey, here's the things that are going on in our life. Here's how God's working in our life. And when you say something like, here's how God's working on our lives, it's kind of another way of saying Jesus' command of tell them how much God has done for you. So we just tell people, hey, you know, this is what we're praying for right now. This is how we see God answering those prayers. And it doesn't always have to be some dramatic change. If it is, dude, share that. But it doesn't have to be. You just have to share your story. And please understand this. Even if you tell your story to people who haven't known you, since birth, your story can still be impactful. When you tell people your story of how you changed the before and after, it's still impactful. I'm just saying that if you're looking for a place to start, telling people about God, start with your own people. Because they're going to be much more influenced than anyone else. And that's what we see our buddy, the demon-possessed man, do. He just went around and said, look, this is what God did for me. This is how God's working in my life. He didn't have to use some big fancy words or sound super smart or, have a degree in theology. He just said, look, this is what God's doing in my life. That's all he did. On a side note, I think this dude gets a bad rap. Because even to this day, 2,000 years later, whenever the story is talked about in the Bible, it's always referred to as the Gerasene demoniac. Demoniac being a guy possessed by a demon, and then the Gerasene demoniac because he's from Gerasene. I think he should go the Prince route and be known as the artist formerly known as the Gerasene demoniac. That's just me, anyway. So how do we tell others how God's working? Like what kind of things do we mention? You just say, look, here's how my life has changed since I started going to church, or since I started being a follower of Jesus. These are things in my life that have changed. This is what I'm learning in my Mo group, which is Momentum small groups that we have throughout the week. This is what we're talking about right now. This is how awesome it is. Man, right now, you know what? This is what I'm praying for. I'm really praying to be a better parent right now. Share that with people. Tell them things that you're trying to change. Like, man, I've been really trying to work on my anger. That's things I've been trying to change right now. Maybe ask them, you know what? These are some of the questions that I've been exploring right now when it comes to God and stuff like that I don't know the answer to. I mean, this dude on Sunday talking about people being possessed by demons, so I started exploring, is that a thing? Does that still happen today? Just sharing questions that you have. For those of you who are joining us at home online, maybe it's simply saying, letting people know, hey, I started becoming a part of this church online. Maybe that's all it is. And if you're not doing any of these things, maybe that's your next step. See, the bottom line is, you don't have to be a staff member of a church in order to influence others. In fact, your story of how God is working in your life is probably going to be way more impactful on people who know you than what anyone says from the stage on Sunday morning. That's because when you speak to your own people about what God is doing in your life, they know the old you and can see the change in the new you. Let's pray. God, thank you so much that you change hearts, you change lives. You give us opportunities to live renewed. God, help us look for ways to share what you're doing in our lives with other people. And help us start by looking at those around us, closest to us, our own people. And God, help us be difference makers. In Jesus' name, amen.